Show starts in 1 minute. Good evening, folks, and a hearty welcome to our drive-in theater. We have a wonderful evening's entertainment lined up for you, one that will provide several hours of pleasurable relaxation and diversion for you and your family.
Like 9 out of 10 film stars, Raquel Welch uses Lux Beauty Soap.
Well, no, I like to be a woman and a man to be a man, you know.
We hope you'll make this a weekly visit. You love the tasty array of snacks we have to offer. Bring your friends. There are always wonderful new pictures to see. We hope you have a wonderful time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Longhouse, the weekly show for the sensible centrist. I have decided to fully drop the NPR branding now, as I wouldn't want it to be associated with a failed PR company. What do you think, Ludwig Path?
Yeah, I agree. We need to update ourselves. We can't live in the past. Right?
Exactly.
So we have new branding every week. But yeah,
Yes.
it's good to be back. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a stressful week, a lot of things happening at once, but I've been trying to catch up on some reading, etc., and actually been looking forward to this chat we're going to have here today, because we are joined by our wonderful guest tonight, which is Nathan C.J. Hood. Welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And thank you for accepting. Now, the reason we invited you on originally was because of an article you wrote for Praxarchy, but that is also based on videos you have done. So it's something you've been talking about for quite a while, which is what you call the chimpanzee power politics, and that's something we're going to get into a bit later, but first, Ludwig Path, would you like to do the honors every time we have this sort of spotlight? Our first question is always of a personal nature.
Yes. So Nathan, tell us about yourself and your red pill story. How did you end up in these spheres?
Yes, I guess like many people, growing up as a teenager, I started out as a classical liberal of some type or another, watching Thomas Sowell videos on YouTube and owning the socialists at school or whatever, right? But then from there you start to get certain recommendations, like academic agents videos on economics or African societies of various kinds. And I think through that, I then got into a number of his political shows and whatnot, and came across various thinkers like Thomas Carlyle. And through reading them, I've moved more away from classical liberalism towards perhaps something like some kind of mixture between reactionary and conservative. I'm never quite sure where I fit between those two. Heavy interest in mythologies of various kinds and how they can inform us and what we might have lost through the kind of removal of mythologies from the public space. And then beyond that as well, just looking at politics from perhaps different points of view through popular culture and things like chimpanzees and other natural phenomena as well.
And you have an academic background.
Yeah, that's right. I got a PhD in church history, looking at the Reformation, and I think this is probably another factor too in my political journey. Is if you study history, you become aware of points of view that predate our own era, and that you engage with people who have very different assumptions from the modern liberal West, who see the world in a completely different way. And particularly with my interest in theology and philosophy in the past, I've had to really wrestle with those issues, and so that's given me a very different, um, or given me an opportunity to engage with perspectives that are maybe different from the mainstream, and that it helps to root me in that way. But yeah, my particular academic research is on Scottish Reformation and how what would you say, the political formulas of the era led to the revolution and the execution of Charles I.
That's very interesting. I mean, I think your background adds a lot of depth to what you're writing. But the topic we're going to cover today is chimpanzee politics, and now we're moving a bit away from theology and more into zoology and almost some things that belong in the sort of new atheist spheres. I mean, we did another stream in I think 2022 on the selfish gene and its consequences. That was the title of the Longhouse stream. It was a very long stream, and I wanted to cover topics related to the ideas of chimpanzee politics in that stream, but it was just way too much. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to have you in here talking about this, because I saw you have a stream on your channel. It's called Chimpanzee Politics, where you're going over these concepts. And just to clarify, because we had some people in the Element chat, ask if this stream was going to be about BLM, but no, it is not. But Nathan, what is chimpanzee?
Anyway,
what is chimpanzee politics?
Well, chimpanzee politics is really the creation of a man called Frans de Waal, who was a primatologist in the 70s. He did some groundbreaking research where in Burger Zoo, which I believe is in Arnhem, in the Netherlands, he was able to study a troop of chimps pretty much 24/7. Which, if you think in the wild, that's pretty much an impossibility. Not only because trying to track the chimps, but also they're pretty violent and would rip you apart. So, in the safety of a zoo, he was able to study them, and he identified certain political strategies and social hierarchies within chimpanzee communities, which he dubs as a kind of Machiavellian intelligence. And so chimpanzee power politics essentially is what he outlines that social hierarchy to be. And I guess as a very basic kind of entry level point here is he moves the shift away from pure brute power being the key factor to coalition building and your ability to establish your own coalitions and disrupt the coalitions of your opponents. And we can see this in a very simple way. You can be the most powerful chimpanzee in the troop. You can be the strongest and fiercest. But if 2 or 3 gang up on you, you're going to lose any fight. So it's not enough just to be the strongest. You need to be able to work with other ones to establish control over the rest of the troop. And as I'm sure we'll get into, there's a number of different ways that chimpanzees try to go about this to greater or lesser success. And many of them tie in with various principles of elite theory that figures like Mosca, Michels, and Schmidt talk about.
It's because that's sort of the angle you take in your article and in your work about this, is sort of trying to take the lessons from Frans de Waal and looking at them through, as he would say, more Machiavellian lenses, like Carl Schmitt, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in some ways, and you gentlemen probably know Schmidt a bit better than me, so please feel free to correct me. But I think actually the chimpanzee situation is helpful because it gives us a bit of distance. We can see similarities with human civilization and politics. And so it forces us to rethink some of our assumptions. And so one of these that I put forward in the article is the exact nature of the friend-enemy distinction. For Schmidt, every kind of political community is made up of friends, and it must have an enemy, an existential threat to it, and it's defined by that boundary between the two, and the two are in kind of perpetual conflict. And often in kind of politics today, especially in our sphere, we see that the conflicts today in terms of friend-enemy distinction. But the chimpanzee one that de Waal looks at I question whether we can analyze it as a friend-enemy dispute, because throughout the conflicts about who will be alpha male, and that's essentially what the males are fighting over, to be the alpha, none of them poses an existential threat to the other. They never kill each other. They never try to seriously harm each other physically, or and they never pose a threat to the survival of the group as a whole. They're rather in competition for that top post, and so I wonder if a better kind of category for them is rivals rather than enemies. And so then when that comes to our own kind of discussion of these things, perhaps in our sphere, we need to distinguish between who might be an enemy to us and who's in conflict with us as a rival, who's trying to
Mm.
get up higher on the hierarchy. And I'll give you an example of something like this. Is you'll often see on Twitter a young upstart criticizing academic agent. Now, AA is probably in our sphere one of the top guys. Let's just say he's an alpha chimp, right? Well, what's this young guy doing? Is he an enemy? Well, some of them I think are. Some of them want to take him down. Naming no names here, but others I think are just trying to get up a few pegs on the social ladder and get some street cred.
I mean,
So
if you're new in any male group, the best way to get attention is to call out the biggest guy in the room, right? So,
mm,
of course, you will have to be able to back it up and assume that that guy would respond to you as well. Which is, if we're talking about someone like AA, the likelihood is quite high, obviously.
yes, but then you've got to back it up, as you say, and oftentimes many are found wanting. But I think that then is a good model for working through things, in terms of identifying who you might want to work with or see as a potential threat or not, and what kind of threat that they're posing as well.
Yeah, I think it's actually really important to look at this because I feel like Carl Smith at this point has just become a sort of meme in a sense, and I wouldn't say maybe it's Oral McIntyre's fault, but I feel like we're just getting to this point where like every situation that's happening, politically, whenever there's a spat or something is going on, it's just like, okay, here's the picture of Carl Smith pointing at like friend/enemy or something, and
Well, I mean, one of
it's
Oran McIntyre's great skills he certainly has earned his position, but I would say that is because of his ability to meme, and not in the humorous sense, but to condense information into one single mental note that he can sort of hook into people's mind, right?
yeah, he's an absolute expert in that, and I think people should follow him on Twitter if they're not already doing that. But I assume, if you're watching this stream, you're probably already you know who he is, right? So that's kind of assumed. But it's been like this very simplified understanding of Carl Smith, where it's just a friend enemy, and it's I like to say that it's kind of it's becoming almost like this grug level, monkey level understanding. But according to Franz de Waal, even monkeys have a more nuanced understanding of friend enemy than I think a lot of the people on Twitter currently have. But if we look at this distinction, because I think it's important to see sort of, okay, who is the friend and the enemy. And with the chimps, when they're talking about an enemy, they talk about someone who you are not extending any courtesy to whatsoever. Like the enemy is basically, say, like a rival tribe of chimpanzees or something, where they will just extend, I mean, using the term rights is a little bit bizarre, but they will extend absolutely zero courtesy towards this tribe. They will physically try to harm them. They will harm their children. Basically do horrendous things to them in order just to defend their territory, because it's understood that the rules that apply inside of the group do not apply outside of the group. Is that correct?
Definitely. I mean, so they won't kill each other to get to the top, but they will absolutely wipe out another tribe of chimps. There's no question about it, because they pose an existential threat. If they remain in their territory, they're going to take their food. They're going to drive them off the land. It's going to lead to the disintegration of their group as a whole. So it's a completely different category. Where though I think there's room for confusion here though in our current situation, is that if you think of, let's just take America as a kind of case study here. you have a democracy. What is a democracy meant to be? It's supposed to be a system where groups of rivals can compete with each other for the top without destroying each other and the whole of the society. Whether it's ever been like that truly is another question, but that's the driving force of it. It's not supposed to contain enemies within its walls. The existential threat ought to be outside, but we're in a situation at the moment where both sides see each other as an existential threat, not only to themselves but to the whole system. And so then that's where you're getting these people using this grug take of Aaron McIntyre memes of, oh, everybody's an enemy, everybody's a threat to me. I think it's that confusion where we don't really, where we're in a system where it shouldn't be like this, but it is, causes this difficulty in interpretation.
Yeah, I think that especially with the the end of history, like the sort of the gay, as we call it, the sort of a global American world order with liberalism and capitalism trying to expand that system to the entire world. What one is essentially trying to do is to make everybody rivals, right? I mean, if everybody's partaking in the market, then we're all trying to compete with each other, but in sort of complementary way where everybody wins. That's kind of the premise as to how what this is sold in as. But you're seeing more and more that, a lot of these other influences, say like, multiculturalism, the problems with incompatible cultures and incompatible ways of viewing the world, and really ingrained sort of dense old patterns, they keep resurfacing, making it impossible to reach this sort of global rival status in a sense. I mean, because I remember, we're talking about the grug takes on the friend enemy, like Oren McIntyre. I think he did an interview with some comedian who said that, everybody's pink on the inside or something, or what was it? Yeah, in 20 years, everybody's going to be brown anyway or something. And people were just writing enemy, enemy, enemy in the comment section, like as if that this comedian is like some sort of existential threat to our movement or something, because he has like 1990s liberal takes on things. But sorry, I think I lost track a little bit there. Let's see if I can read
does. I mean, I don't want to sidetrack the discussion too much, but it's something that you and I have been talking about this week, Lundic Path, in terms of I'm going to be a bit contradictory here and say that I do understand that a lot of people on the right see that in a world where sort of nuance has become the reason why everything seems to be collapsing, or let's say an over focus on nuance and details and managerialism, going with baser instinctual reactions to the world around you, or as I'm in the middle of like reading a lot of Dutton at the moment, and he's talking about like abstract thinking versus concrete thinking, and that a lot of people seem to be wanting to sort of overcorrect back into 100% concrete thinking, and that leaves little room for that nuance, which I think you need some nuance if you're going to style yourself as being sensible. I mean, it would be very cool to be able to, okay, so let's see here. Excess of Liberty says, I prefer helicopter rides as a way of settling ideological disputes. That's very based. How are you going to do that from the position you're in right now, right?
Very based, Paul.
It's like, yeah, cool. Okay, you posted something based in the chat. I'm not trying to like rib on Excess of Liberty. It's just an example, right? What's the actual way forward? And in trying to analyze that and trying to find that way forward, you're going to have to do some nuance thinking, some abstract thinking, because that's the world we live in.
Well, definitely, and I think just the core idea of chimp power politics is coalition building. It's working with other people who, or well, in for the chimps, other chimps who have different goals, who might be a little bit of a threat to you along the way, but managing to build coalitions that will get you power. If you're going to do that, you need to have a bit of nuance to be able to identify who's a possible coalition partner and who's not, and how you might enter coalition with them as well. It's not just being an ally, it's how you do that and how you weight that coalition towards your own advantage, perhaps to the detriment of your coalition partner. So I think that requires a level of thought, of complex thought, which kind of instinctive, intuitive responses aren't enough.
That is something that I would say that the left has been very good at doing for a long while. I mean, you see it all the time. They make alliances with more radical elements, and then once the more let's say marketable parts of their political groupings gain more power, they sort of just throw them out, right?
Yeah, they've done an absolute masterclass in doing this. They will just elevate, okay, now we'll bring out the black coalition, now we bring out the gay coalition, like whatever they need at the moment, they will just roll out and then they just roll it back again when it's not expedient to use them. I mean, the opposite of this, that is like the purebred friend-enemy distinction thinking. It really is like the sort of 90s, like we talked about the 90s Wignat, the mid-century German skinhead character, where what you're doing is just positioning like the sort of small tribe inside of a country, and then just using pure like friend-enemy distinction, which means that you're really positioning yourself as an enemy to the regime that you're living under, right? So you're like this small group inside of a larger group, making yourself the enemy of everybody inside of that group, with the consequence that they just smash you, right? I mean, there's no way that you can win militarily against the entire country that you're living in with, sort of just a few people in with like bootstraps and jackboots. So that's sort of part of the reason that we have to kind of rid ourselves of a lot of that thinking, even though I know a lot of people are upset at the current situation.
Now, in another article which you shared around Ludic Path, we find Newt Gingrich. We had a talk about how to say his name, that had an interview in The Atlantic some years ago, I think in 2018. And there was a bit of an interesting overlap in that he's talking about the chimpanzee power politics and Franz de Waal as well. And something caught my eye, so to speak, Nathan, when you talked about, how democracy is sort of like a system for this to take place, this sort of rivalry, and this article goes into great depth, sort of bemoaning the effects that Gingrich have had on the American democracy, and sort of moving it away from something that could be that into a more, well, let's call it blood sports, friend-enemy territory.
Yes, I mean, just to make a few notes about this article. I mean, it's really following back to the Selfish Gene stream. I did mention that, the company Enron, that was one of the biggest sort of financial frauds in American history. Like not the CEO, I think it was the COO, Jeff Skilling. Like his favorite book was The Selfish Gene, and he drew a lot of the philosophy behind running Enron the way that he did from Richard Dawkins' Selfish Gene. But there was also the case of Newt Gingrich, that I think a lot of people at least know who he is, unless you're very new to this, because he's been around for so long, right? He's been in politics since he was since in the 80s. And his contribution, he came in like he's also a PhD, and he's very well read, which is something that you don't really expect for like the typical Republican politician, at least not in current year. But like the journalist in this article basically claims that the reason that American politics is so kind of pro wrestling inspired, it's partially, or like almost mostly, to blame on Newt Gingrich and what she calls the Republican Revolution that happened in the 90s, which is really like Newt Gingrich's contribution to politics as to how to change the landscape of how the Republican Democrats dynamics work, by introducing a much more kind of friend enemy lens to do the politics in, as opposed to this more kind of like clean, boring kind of European style of compromise, which was really the norm for Republicans prior
To
to
be
that.
fair, and this, to be fair to Gingrich, what he saw as compromise is the Republicans, staying a minority and taking L's forever.
Yes, I mean, so it's very interesting because people are right now talking about like, why won't Republicans fight, right? Well, why are they so cucked and they won't take hard lines on anything? But apparently, this was a problem in the '90s as well that Gingrich saw. It's like, well, okay, these people are just totally cucked. They're making compromises and they can't compete with the Democrats. So we need to bring in more of a clear friend-enemy distinction here. We bring in also more of an aesthetic of the kind of primal. But maybe you should just bring the article up and we can read what's actually in there.
Yeah, are there any specific parts or just to...
Well, yeah, I mean the article is very long, but you could scroll down to
It
the
is
picture
very
of the giraffe picture. I think that's a good place to start.
All right, let's start with the giraffe picture. Man,
It's a soy
he is
jack.
a guy. I mean,
He's
I'm
pointing
sorry.
at the giraffe.
He has a he has an aura about him that I don't find very. I don't think that picture is very flattering. I've seen videos of him where he looks a lot better than he does in that picture, but yeah. All right, do you want me to just start reading, or is there anything specific?
Yeah, you can start reading, and we'll just comment along the way here.
Very good. Just feel both of you to just jump in whenever there's anything catching your eye. On June 24th, 1978, Gingrich stood to address a gathering of college Republicans at a Holiday Inn near the Atlanta airport. It was a natural audience for him. At 35, he was a more youthful looking than the average congressional candidates, with fashionably robust sideburns and a cool professor charisma that had made him one of the more popular faculty members at West Georgia College. But Gingrich
I posted a link to the picture so you don't have to imagine. It's actually pretty funny. Yeah, if you see it in private chat there.
Let's see here. Oh, this is him in the old days.
Yes.
That's amazing. Looks like George.
Can you share? Let's see.
Yeah, I'm trying. I just don't want to move away from that article because it's loaded in the Wayback Machine and it takes so long to bring back up. So this is
there
him,
he is.
His youth. Yeah, I say youth. He was 35.
He was 30, yes. But I mean, that's he's been there. Like he's like 90 years old now or something, and that's how long he's been in the game. So a lot of staying power.
Very strong sideburns on him there. All right, let's get back to the article. But Gingrich had not come to deliver an academic lecture to the young activists before him. He had come to foment revolution. Quote, "One of the great problems we have in the Republican Party is that we don't encourage you to be nasty," he told the group. "We encourage you to be neat, obedient, and loyal, and faithful, and all those Boy Scout words, which would be great around the campfire, but lousy in politics." For their party to succeed, Gingrich went on, the next generation of Republicans would have to learn to race hell, to stop being so nice, and realize that politics was, above all, a cutthroat war for power, and to start acting like it.
This was something I wanted to talk about a little bit with the chimps. I think there's a really good comparison we can make here. So when we look at chimpanzee social hierarchy, the way that hierarchy is primarily shown is through signs of respect. So the alpha might be sitting there, and when a chimp passes him, they have to bow to him. They literally get on their knees and bow before him. The females will then turn around and maybe let him kind of sniff their behinds, and the males will lie down and let him step over. So literally stepping over them.
Right.
When a male starts to compete against him or against the alpha, the first thing that they do is they no longer show any respect. They won't kneel before him. In fact, they'll actually get in his face and start hooting or smashing trees nearby and buffing. So their hair stands on end right in front of him. So it's undermining that that whole hierarchy, which is dependent upon respect. And the way whoever wins the conflict will be the one who gets respect at the end. Whoever submits and shows respect to the other has lost the conflict. So Gingrich is he read Duvall's book, and I think he's getting this idea of respect affirms a hierarchy, affirms a regime. So if the Republicans keep showing respect as they do, well, they're never going to win because they're automatically conceding to the Democrats.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, I think the article would go on to argue that this sort of spun out of control and then sort of worsened into what would become modern day American politics. But it's a very good catch that this must have been Gingrich's sort of outlook from the start. This is how you do it.
Yes, and I mean, part of the reason that I want to bring attention to this, because it's, American politics has always been quite puzzling to me as to how it ended up like that. And you end up thinking that the people who are involved, like Americans, just have like lower IQ on average. I didn't mean to offend anybody, but that's kind of the impression that you're getting here. But you're seeing that there's actually a lot more thought that's gone into this. It is, people with PhDs, very kind of big-brained people who have just looked at the literature and looked at the numbers and just said that, like, this is actually the best strategy for politics. It's not something I'm doing because I'm stupid. It's something I'm doing because I'm smart. And of course, it has devolved. One can only say that. When I look at it, I just get a headache now. I'm my Twitter feed is like filling up with stuff, gearing up for the 2024 election. And I mean, then you can really see that even the commentary around politics as to who's going to win, all these sort of pundits, they're talking about it in like this complete monkey style way as to who's going to have the dominant presence and who's going to bow before the other guy, and well, Trump is taller than DeSantis and whatever, he has like this star power presence. It's headache inducing for me, honestly, to just sit and listen to it as a sort of, this is what politics has become, but okay, here we are.
It's interesting though, because you could see, like, in some ways, Gingrich is noticing the uniparty long before Yavin's on the scene, but he's giving us a very different solution to the problem of the uniparty. Because whereas for Yavin, it's essentially let's try and win over some of the elites to our side. For Gingrich, it's let's humiliate the elites, and in doing so, we'll undermine their authority, and we'll be able to wave in a new group of elites based on this a new coalition.
Yeah. So here, let's see. The GOP was then at its lowest point in modern history. Scores of Republican lawmakers had been wiped out in the aftermath of Watergate, and those who'd survived seemed to Gingrich sadly resigned to a permanent minority mindset. It was like death, he recalls, of the mood in the caucus. They were morally and psychologically shattered. But Gingrich had a plan. The way he saw it, Republicans would never be able to take back the House as long as they kept compromising with the Democrats out of some high-minded civic desire to keep congressional business humming along. His strategy was to blow up the bipartisan coalitions that were essential to legislating, and then seize on the resulting dysfunction to wage a populist crusade against the institutions of Congress itself. His idea, says Norm Ornstein, a political scientist who knew Gingrich at the time, was to build toward a national election where people were so disgusted by Washington and the way it was operating that they would throw the ins out and bring the outs in.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it? I mean, it's weird how these things repeat. I just keep thinking about this sort of "it's over, we're back" meme when you're reading this sort of like resignation stuff. It's over, we're back, and it's over again.
They're talking about civility. I mean, you can find a lot of examples from American politics where it isn't civil, but in the mid-century, or I should say in the post-war, the congressional day-to-day, as far as I understand, did not look like anything like it does today in terms of like the media hype and the sort of intensity of everything.
No, absolutely not.
Right, should I just keep on reading?
Yes.
Gingrich recruited a cadre of young bomb throwers, a group of 12 congressmen he christened the Conservative Opportunity Society, and together they stalked the halls of Capitol Hill, searching for trouble in TV cameras. Their emergence was not at first greeted with enthusiasm by the more moderate Republican leadership. They were too noisy, too brash, too hostile to the old guard's cherished sense of decorum. They even looked different, sporting blow-dried pompadours while their more camera-shy elders smeared Brill cream on their comb-overs. Gingrich and his cohort showed little interest in legislating, a task that had heretofore been seen as the primary responsibility of elected legislators. Bob Livingston, a Louisiana Republican who had been elected to Congress a year before Gingrich, marveled at the way the hard-charging Georgian rose to prominence by ignoring the traditional path taken by new lawmakers. Quote, my idea was to work within the committee structure, take care of my district, and just pay attention to the legislative process, Livingston told me. But Newt came in as a revolutionary.
So I mean, just wanted to pause because it's the previous section of this that I found something in there when you talked about the buy cream comb overs and the pompadours. I had to look up what a pompadour was. I mean, it is like this. Like you've put a lot of gel in your hair. It's like this almost like this grease, grease lightning type of haircut. And I mean, you can still see this today, where most American politicians are old, like they're old as dirt, but they'll use like hair transplants and wigs and so on. Like it's very, very prevalent. I noticed that also when I was in the United States, how the use of well, I mean, people who have hair loss, basically, like you have to have a transplant or some kind of wig to be taken seriously. There's very few people who are just sport like a regular bald head, even though they're in like their 60s or 70s. Or they will have like this kind of styled 70s comb over. It just doesn't happen anymore. You see it somewhere in European politics, but it's always fascinated me how like the the American leaders just have to have perfect heads of hair. And of course you see it with Trump, with Biden as well. Like they've put so much effort into just maintaining whatever they have left on their heads, just to garner support. Really, I mean, it it is a really important thing.
Well, I'm sure there's some correlation between what people look for in terms of voting and hair. Although, if I do remember correctly, I thought being bald was a sign of higher levels of testosterone in certain males, at least.
Well, yeah, maybe, but having long hair is a sign of youth, right?
Yeah, that's true.
That's
as well.
also
Yeah.
sort of what they're going for, the kind of youthful energy,
Trying to
even though they're old as shit.
Not everyone has access to the adrenochrome. For revolutionary purposes, the House of Representatives was less a governing body than an arena for conflict and drama, and Gingrich found ways to put on a show. He recognized an opportunity in the newly installed C-SPAN cameras and began delivering tirades against Democrats to an empty chamber, knowing that his remarks would be beamed to viewers across the country. I think that's very interesting, and it's something I've thought about before very often when you see like people in Congress delivering speeches, and then if you watch like the actual live version of that speech instead of like the clip that gets sent on the news, where it's zoomed in, like there's like 5 people in the chamber, right? And you think like this guy is speaking in front of like every other senator, right, or congressman.
Yeah, it's interesting to know what's going on a little bit behind the scenes. It also highlights the importance of, if you want to revolutionize or get ahead of other people, you have to use the most current tech. Like just get ahead of the wave there.
Well, I mean, I guess like what's it? AOC is starting. Does she not have TikTok now and streams constantly to all the Zoomers out there? And
She's doing the same thing just for the Zoomers.
Yeah, it's the same principle.
And it was Trump with Twitter. He was very sort of ahead of the curve on that, in terms of how to use Twitter in the way that you do it now. Even though, like, now you're seeing he's sort of falling back on it. He doesn't want to go back on Twitter, and he's just on these kind of fringe platforms that he made himself. It's a bad move.
I think it is a bad move, even though he would probably see it as weakness to come crawling back to Twitter. I don't know. Okay. As his profile grew, Gingrich took aim at the moderates in his own party, calling Bob Dole the tax collector for the welfare state, and baited Democratic leaders with all manner of epithet and insult. Pro-communist, un-American, tyrannical. In 1984, one of his floor speeches prompted a red-faced eruption from Speaker Tip O'Neill, who said of Gingrich's attacks, "It's the lowest thing that I have seen in my 32 years in Congress." The episode landed them both on the nightly news, and Gingrich, knowing the score, declared victory. "I am now a famous person," he gloated to the Washington Post. It's hard to overstate just how radical these actions were at the time, although Congress had been a volatile place during periods of American history, with fistfights and canings and representatives bellowing violent threats at one another. By the middle of the 20th century, lawmakers had largely coalesced around a stabilizing set of norms and traditions. Entrenched committee chairs may have dabbled in petty corruption, and Democratic leaders may have pushed around the Republican minority when they were in a pinch, but as a rule, comity reigned. Most members still believed in the idea that the framers had in mind, says Thomas Mann, a scholar who studies Congress. They believed in genuine deliberation and compromise. They had institutional loyalty.
I love it. There was just some corruption going on, but the real problem was Newt Gingrich insulting
Yeah.
other politicians.
Oh yeah, there was some corruption, and the Democrats pushed the Republicans around whenever they wanted, and yeah, but Gingrich is the real bad guy. Like, this entire article, by the way, is written in a very bad faith. Like, this author hates Gingrich. It is very clear.
I agree that it is like a sort of standard shitlib think piece, but it's a very well written, elaborate shitlib think piece, as opposed to these like 3-section, AI narrated articles that you're getting now with some link to a tweet or something. It's enjoyable, even though it's vitriolic, I will say. So some things were better in the past, even though it was just 5 years ago.
At some points, the journalist cannot conceal their hatred. It bleeds through. This ethos was perhaps best embodied by Republican Minority Leader Bob Michel, an amiable World War II veteran. Is this? I think is it Bob Michel or Bob Mitchell? I think maybe it's Mitchell. Amiable World War II veteran known around Washington for his aversion to swearing. Doggone it and by Jiminy were fixtures of his vocabulary, as well as his penchant for carpooling and golfing with Democratic colleagues. Mitchell was no liberal, but he believed that the best way to serve conservatism and his country was by working honestly with Democratic leaders, pulling legislation inch by inch to the right when he could, and protecting the good faith that made aisle crossing possible.
We've made so much fun of these characters, right? I think the entire shtick of the DR is just to make fun of people who think like that now. Even though I have a lot of sympathies with that, there's a lot of realism and honesty in that stuff. But the half of the fun on Twitter is just shitting on guys like this in politics.
To go back to Oren McIntyre, it's the side who wants to be left alone versus the one who wants to win, right? It's that's very nice that you want that, but the other side isn't playing that game, so.
I guess though, if we tried to steel man him a little bit here, you could say, well, he's a minority partner in a coalition, and perhaps all he hopes for is a few wins here or there. Now we know that there's a lot of major losses, but let's look at the other side. And I think the rest of the article kind of goes on to this with Gingrich and then later with Trump. Okay, these guys can disrupt. They put 2 fingers up to the establishment and they talk about clearing them all out. But when they get into power, they're unable to make any coalitions and thus are unable to make any headway themselves. Yeah. So you could see, well, okay, maybe Michel doesn't get much done, but did he actually achieve more than Gingrich or Trump in terms of actual policy? I don't know the answer to that, but I reckon there's a good chance of it.
I mean, the article does take go through a lot of pain to mention that Gingrich, once he got to be Speaker of the House, he would achieve a lot by working closely with Clinton, up until the point, obviously, where Clinton landed himself in a bit of hot water with with an intern. So I think that Gingrich saw the value of it as well, just purely in a, I guess, political realism way. Whether or not it was too late for him to actually play it out, I don't know. Burkarl in the chat says, I can't wait to be a bribable official in based world. I will grant the rank of white to half castisas against regulation, but not castizos. Well, at least you're still marked out as a friend, Burkarl, so we'll allow it. Let's see here. Gingrich was unimpressed by Mitchell's conciliatory approach. He represented a culture which had been defeated consistently, he recalls. More important, Gingrich intuited that the old dynamics that had produced public servants like him were crumbling. Tectonic shifts in American politics, particularly around issues of race and civil rights, had triggered an ideological sorting between the two parties. Liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats, two groups that have been well represented in Congress, were beginning to vanish, and with them the cross-party partnerships that have fostered cooperation. So this is also an important point. I mean, if the landscape is shifting in the sense that just the amount of people who are willing to work with the other side are shrinking, then sort of shoring up your own defenses would be more important, right?
Well, you have to evolve, right? I mean, it's framed as devolution, but it is in a sense just an adaptation to whatever it is. Of course, the author is not going to bring in, the effects of, say, demographic shifts on the politics and polarization and so on. And to be honest, I mean, it's easy to take that analysis is that this is just because of demographics, but it's not really congruent with elite theory to think that way. There's one has to think about other reasons as to why things turn out to be this polarized, aside from the fact that there are population shifts.
Let's keep going here. This polarization didn't originate with Gingrich, but he took advantage of it, as he set out to circumvent the old power structures and build his own rather than letting the party bosses in Washington decide which candidates deserved institutional support. He took control of a group called GoPac and used it to recruit and train an army of mini-newts to run for office. Gingrich hustled to keep his cause and himself in the press. If you're not in the Washington Post every day, you might as well not exist, he told one reporter. His secret to capturing headlines was simple. The number one fact about the news media is that they love fights. When you give them confrontations, you get attention. When you get attention, you can educate. Effective as these tactics were in the short term, they had corrosive effect on the way Congress operated. Gradually, it went from legislating to the weaponization of legislation to the permanent campaign to the permanent war, Mann says. It's like he took a wrecking ball to the most powerful and influential legislature in the world. But Gingrich looks back with pride on the transformation he set in motion. Noise became a proxy for status, he tells me, and no one was noisier than Newt. Well, there certainly is the echo of it these days, right? I mean, that's pretty much, and it makes sense because Gingrich was a part of the early days, if I remember correctly, or at least he was like a supporter of Trump in the early days.
Yeah, he was,
and advised him, and so it makes sense that Trump would also adopt the sort of any news is good news or any PR is good PR approach, right?
Yes, because I think as much as Trump was in the headlight, I don't think he was as noisy in the past as he was with his presidential campaign. There seems to have been a sort of ramping up of that particular aspect of him.
Well, and remember in the primaries, the very first kind of conflict that he engaged with was this kind of debate between was it Jeb Bush, and he was the favorite to be the nominee, but he was that kind of across the aisle Republican that this article's describing, whereas Trump took this very Gingrich approach and basically decimated him, and that really got the attention of the media.
Well,
and so
what's interesting as well is that he managed to use that same tactic to decimate Ted Cruz at the same time, who was also in the same debates, right? But he was representing the more Tea Party side of the Republicans.
That's right.
So it works both ways, weirdly enough, right?
Yeah, and I think if we were going to look back at the chimpanzee thing, it's these conflicts are almost drive the rest of the group's dynamic, and everybody's kind of watching them within these chimpanzee troops. They're all wanting to find out who's going to be the winner, who's going to be the loser, and in turn, which should I back? Which coalition should I be a part of? And so I do think there's probably something quite instinctual within us that just not only do we want to watch the fight just for its own sake, but also because, well,
Yeah,
we want to be
you
on the
need to
winning
know
side,
who's going to
right?
be the next top dog, right?
Yeah,
That's why you
exactly.
watch. I mean,
Yes.
that's what's
I
so
mean,
weird about watching the. Well, I mean, it was very clear when Trump was doing it, but a lot of the other modern sort of early debates, you look at the DNC debates, you look at the Republican debates that didn't involve Trump, it's a lot less clear that that's happening. And even when someone has a lot of populist support, like say, what's his name, um, the communist guy. The
Sanders.
one Sanders, yes. Like Sanders, he just gets stepped over by the apparatus, right?
Yeah, I don't think he ever really goes against it. Like if he really wanted to get in, I get if we're going to apply this, he should have been shredding Hillary, but he didn't do that at all. He
No, he
gave her
just
too much
goes on
respect,
about yeah.
conceded her place as the authority, and so automatically was second.
And that's the whole meme of the no refunds came
Mm.
out of, right? He took everyone's money, and then when push came to shove, he wasn't willing to fight the power actually, right?
I mean, of course, it is a lot to expect. But going back to the kind of like monkey, you talk about like the monkey dimension of what's going on there. I'm thinking back at it now when I was watching it and supporting Trump. I mean, it really worked. It really, really worked the way that it should have. Having gone through it, if I'd go out and watch it again, I would just probably shake my head a little bit more. And I mean, knowing what I know now, but they're like these are the things that we've talked about, in the Longhouse episode on persuasion. We did the Longhouse episode on sort of the new left and the LSD culture, where I was looking at some of the these sort of like Timothy Leary, Robert Anton Wilson personality theories, in a sense, how the human personality develops as it relates to neurology. And they talk a lot about the 3-layer brain structure without getting too technical about it. But there's a sort of commonality between chimpanzees and other mammals as well as human beings in the brain, in that there's a sort of layer. We have like a similar layer to the brain that is just there to recognize kind of spatial things and recognize kind of territory hierarchy and so on, and that is sort of always working underneath the rationality, in a sense, like, which is done by the frontal cortex. But underneath the frontal cortex, like, you have like this second layer of the brain that's always active, analyzing, measuring up people, looking at who's the leader, who's where am I in the hierarchy, and so on. And it's very powerful to just try to appeal to that layer, in a sense. And with these chimps, and Franz de Waal observing these chimps, you're seeing just sort of a low res version kind of what human politics would be without the frontal cortex, in a sense. Like, when you don't have that rationality brain, or that the abstractions, it's just hierarchical.
Exactly, and I think so that kind of intuition, what drives many of us into this fear, is it feels totally unnatural, the current order, right? Because we feel certain hierarchies, we sense them, but in the actual political social hierarchy of today, it's totally inverted, intentionally so. And so that causes a great deal of animosity to it. So when somebody comes in essentially affirming it, we want to get on board, and it's very tempting most of the time, especially if it's somebody like Trump who waged this kind of fight as well. But there's another factor there that I wanted to pick up on, is that when you look at alpha chimps and how they build up that kind of respect from the rest of the group, one of the things that they engage in is not just protecting and providing for their supporters. They groom them. They, when the chimps eat the bugs off each other and tidy up their hair and whatnot. And you can see this with Trump in a way. Those rallies that he does, they're not really going to get him loads more votes. People go to those, but it's a limited number, and they're not getting massive reach on social media. It's that kind of intimate bond that he's creating with his supporters, so that they'll be totally devoted to him and back him in every situation. And when you compare what his core support is like compared to Biden's, it's the difference between night and day. Because somebody like Biden could never create that kind of intimacy, which an alpha male needs to in his support, at least a chimpanzee one.
Yeah, no, this is very true. I also connect this to like these sort of different paradigms of politics, as to like you have the idea of like this centrist, quote unquote. We use the term in a lot of different ways, so it can get confusing. But I think Biden is the centrist in terms of having like the broadest, being like a mile wide and an inch deep, in a sense. Like I mean, of course, now it's just ridiculous because he's senile and he can't pronounce sentences or think coherently. But like, imagine a Biden that's 20, 30 years younger, who can speak coherently. He's sort of a guy that's inoffensive to most people, and like the largest amount of percentage of people think that he's okay, he's passable. They don't find anything particularly offensive about him. But with Trump, it's really like the depth there, that where you really have to drill in on, the focus on the few, not the many. And just like you said, grooming basically like these groups of people that are just diehard supporters. And I mean, it's no joke. You still have these people who will go to the grave for Trump. They basically, have shut off their entire frontal cortex just to completely live in that hierarchy brain. Like I saw one of these clips of one of these QAnon guys, right? I'm seeing it all the time, and the amount of like knots they've tied themselves in to sort of stick with the Trump train, it's quite unbelievable, and it speaks to the power of this.
Sorry, I had muted myself. I wanted to say yes. I actually saw a very funny post relating to that today about QAnon, but I don't think I could find it.
What was it on
But
the
I think it's
Longhouse?
very interesting,
think,
as you said, Nathan, with the grooming and stuff like that. The Trump is aware that he has to sort of give something back to the other chimps, to show that he sees them, right. But it doesn't have to be more than that. It's very small gestures that's required from quote unquote the king or the alpha alpha chimp, it seems, to sort of build that mythos, I guess, of cooperation and a personal bond, I suppose.
Yeah, as you say, it's just literally recognizing that the other person's there, and you actually acknowledge their existence, and you're somewhat grateful for their support. Whereas perhaps maybe this would be a bit. The other side of it, though, is with Biden, his support doesn't really come from the masses. It comes from the networks, the elite networks already in existence, and you can see that with some alpha chimps who basically they will only ally with other males, and that's quite effective because as a minority, so two males, for example, can take down an alpha and his female supporters quite easily, because one of them will go and distract all the females and the other one will go after the alpha, and through that process they'll be able to undermine his rule quite effectively. But then when they get into power, one of them might the alpha might only be allied with males, but he'll allow one of his subordinates to go and work with the masses or with the females. So perhaps that's kind of how Biden's working. He's more like that kind of. I don't like using the word alpha male of Joe Biden, but if we have to in this scenario, then he is that kind of elite who's let out the responsibility of the masses to maybe the media or other organizations.
All right.
And
Do you want me to? Sorry, what?
Sorry, Walrus. I was just going to say, and that's probably a more effective regime than one that's based on what Trump's got at the moment, or did have, where he's able to cultivate this intimacy with a group in the masses, but when it comes to actually ruling, they offer very little support in overturning the current regime.
Yeah. You want me to keep reading the article, Ludwig Path?
I think we've gotten through the most important things, like at least reading the parts that you've done currently. So
okay, you sent me an image. Yeah, is this the one you want me to show?
I thought that was the one you were referring to. The
okay, yeah, sure.
image.
I think that's the one I was. Let me. Telegram is weird sometimes with sharing stuff. Telegram. Now I have to find it again. Nope. This is riveting. All right. Just give me a minute. Sorry about this. There it is. Please. I should be able to do this. Here it is. If Q is a LARP, then we have all and millions of other patriots have ruined their lives. We have been jailed, divorced, ostracized, fired, persecuted, and burned most of our family and friend connections. Q can't be a LARP because I know I haven't lost everything for nothing. God wouldn't let me lose everything. I am a warrior of God, and he's right, and they are wrong, always.
Yeah, of course, this doesn't just, you can't explain this just by like chimpanzee reciprocal politics, right? There is a religious dimension to this as well, where I feel like it hooks into the Protestant brain, the American frontier, Protestant brain as well. It's a fascinating phenomenon. I'm sure a lot of it has been amplified by intelligence agencies and so on, but I mean, especially considering that this stuff started on 4chan, it's so unbelievable for me to just sit and watch this stuff. Like, these people are just destroying their lives for absolutely nothing at this point. It would be interesting to just do an episode on looking at more of these cases of these Q-tards, as we call them.
Feels like a bit of low-hanging fruit, but it could be fun, yes. Now, I wanted to return real quick, just because I find it interesting to our discussion about sort of friend-enemy versus friend-rival enemy. And we talked a bit about stuff like Twitter, and given that a lot of this is in online spaces, I can't help but think that some of the sort of the blood sports that we're seeing are a product of just sort of Twitter, really, the way Twitter works. What do you guys think?
Well, yeah, the algorithm does dictate a lot of modern discourse, no doubt about it.
I think I feel that Twitter as a platform, for some reason, just lends itself to, shit flinging, of a better word. I guess that works out with the chimpanzees.
I don't know, how uncivilized for a chimp. I guess, yeah, I agree with you. I think it does allow for that, because it's a space which allows for rapid rises within subcultures, I guess, and between subcultures as well. So, and often it's the fights, it's the feuds which get the most retweets, most likes, most responses, and then in turn get shared more and more. So is it also part of our psychology which is being tied into with the internet, or with Twitter in particular here?
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking is how much potential energy, I suppose, from physics is being wasted on rival fights that really don't have anything to do with you individually. How much of my personal potential energy is being thrown away having arguments with some guy 7 tweets deep in a thread, or being fed, as you said, you mentioned someone like AA. Twitter really likes, after Elon took over, Twitter really likes showing me like things he and like one other random person is arguing about 7 tweets deep, right? Instead maybe we should be building community and having internal, fair enough, having internal rivalries within those communities, but I'm not sure how doing that on Twitter is helpful.
Yeah, I think there's a very, ancient part of the human brain that's not just preoccupied with hierarchies, but also trying to observe changes within the hierarchies. So that's why it's so entertaining to sit and watch these Twitter fights where you're seeing like here's the alpha dog, it's coming out, and then some newcomers coming in to disrespect the alpha dog, and you want to see how this confrontation ends out to reorient your hierarchy, right? And I think, even like with Twitter or something like, say, professional wrestling or something, it's really just your brain updating a hierarchy of a set of characters, and that's why it's entertaining. And it's such a powerful time wasting mechanism, particularly when these people are completely fictitious. Like they don't exist, and they're not, they
but
have
you
no
do
effect on their
recognize
lives
it,
at all.
though, plugging back into Trump, you know, when he sort of thrashes Jeb in that first debate, you don't really care about what his politics are, as like the monkey part of your brain, right? It just goes like, holy shit, he's destroyed Jeb. I love him, right? Whatever he's
Yes.
for, I'm for, right? You get that moment.
He's clearly the top dog here, so I'm just going to follow him. I can't fail because he made the other guy look stupid or something. It's
I also wanted to talk about, Nathan. You mentioned women quite a bit in your article, or female chimpanzees, and how they can play a part as well. Do you see any overlap there in terms of human politics?
Well, I mean, Deval basically says the female chimps are just the masses in the troop. They have no capabilities of ruling and have no desire to rule, essentially. But they will choose their male to essentially ascend the hierarchy, and some of them will be successful or less successful depending on where their male ends up. So it's a very patriarchal society, I guess. The chimpanzee one. There's no kind of gender fluidity or anything like that.
There seems to be a point where one strategy would be to sort of drive a wedge between the masses, so to speak, and the elites, which I found very echoing in Gingrich's strategy, where the overall point isn't to make people aware of, you know, what's going on in Washington. It's quite the opposite. It's trying to make people think that, you know, whatever is going on in Washington is so far removed from my life that, you know, I don't have any love for any people in Washington.
Yeah, exactly. I think Deval would call this a kind of separating incidents. So how the chimp would go about it is, so remember the alpha male has to protect and provide. That's his main obligations. So he's going to try and show that that's not the case at all by attacking any of the females when the alpha's in their presence. And in time, that will drive the females away from the alpha. They won't trust him anymore because he can't protect and he can't provide. But at the same time, this usurper, when the alpha's not there, will protect and provide the females. So he essentially takes that role from them. He shows that Washington, I guess, is this place which doesn't protect you, doesn't provide for you, is filled with enemies. But at the same time, if you back us, we will do all of these things that you, on a very basic level, want from the government or want from the regime. So I guess, yeah, that is right. You can separate the elites from their most fundamental support, but the catch is chimps who, if there are, if the alpha has other male chimps on his side, he can still maintain power, even if he's lost the females to a large degree. You need a coalition which can overcome that sort of situation. And just winning over the females or the masses won't be enough to achieve that.
Sorry, it was muted. No, that's true, and I don't want it to be. I don't want anyone to misunderstand. I don't think the idea is that, you know, you separate the populace from the elites and then you'll have a populist uprising. I think anyone in our circles have have lost their hope for that. But there's something to be said about sort of driving a wedge between the alpha and his base support as a strategy.
Well, you could see that the regime's done that to Trump. When they cut him off from Twitter, they broke most of his support away from him. So perhaps
Exactly.
the current regime's done it more effectively than the DR or the right in general.
Well, that's interesting. That's an interesting thought. Yeah. Another thing that was very much talked about when Trump won in 2016 was that when he entered office, a lot of the people who were working as staffers, sort of the administrative and the bureaucracy around the White House would have to be forcibly changed. And that was the big fear for a lot of people, that, you know, the change that was going to happen in a lot of the bureaucracy in Washington would be so, let's use the word disruptive, that it would upset a lot of a lot of ways of doing things that have been set in stone. Now, it turns out that that bureaucracy managed to basically stay on board, more or less, and isolate Trump, really. But and it's also the sort of the reason behind what's Yarvin's idea of this? You basically have to fire every bureaucrat in the country and just pay them off and start over. Because driving that wedge seems to be impossible in the current system. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, and maybe I'm just rambling.
No, it does seem to make sense. I mean, what I'm thinking about now is really that the we're seeing that all of these very primal dynamics are playing out between the political leaders and the populist masses. The problem is that the tangible rewards that are given from the leader to the masses, it's not really it's not tangible anymore. It's not protection, and it's not material goods or like bananas or access to females. It's just signaling. I mean, that's all it is. Like they can't really give you anything other than
Some student
airtime.
loan
Like they're
debt.
just on the air and they're talking about you in a nice way. Like, well, I will just sit here and just talk about you. You know, talk about how great the American South is, or you know, the Rust Belt, how they deserve credit, or they're like the backbone of America, or you know, like this sort of Bud Light commercial that they ran now. It's this apology tour. You know,
Yeah.
the good old boys, you know, with the cowboy hats and everything. Like that's the, you know, alpha. That's what you're getting down as sort of trickle down benefit from the alpha male, and it's not. And I think it's sort of the same.
And that's
with
not
like
sticking, and it never
you know,
will, because they.
well, it's like you know, Meloni in Italy as well. Like these speeches that she's holding, or Viktor Orban or something. I mean, I'm seeing more and more of these, you know, quote unquote populist speeches. I'm just rolling my eyes back in my head, right? But they're just doing like this. It's like this constant signaling to this what I call like the Turley crowd about how great they are and how we're going to save, you know, traditionalism and conservatism and so on. And that's it. That's what you get. You know, you just get you support a guy, and then you get more airtime with them talking about how great you are, and very little changes as far as your material conditions or the way you're able to live your life. That's kind of my thought right now.
There's two things there, I think. One is, so going back to Gingrich, all of these guys still think that the real battle is within the democratic arena. And if they get to be the president, oh, then we can sort things out. Whereas actually, that's not the alpha position in our society. Indeed, there's a regime which has a kind of global reach now, and we're learning more and more that it doesn't involve governmental institutions a lot of the time. Indeed, they often take on policies from NGOs or corporations and so on. So they're
But that's
working
the weird
in an
thing,
arena
though.
which is not the right place to fight.
Right. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's kind of the strange thing, and why I think we as a sphere are using so much time talking and discussing this. I'm not sure if you were at the UK event last year, Nathan.
Yes.
If you remember Academic Agent's talk about the octopus there. I mean, someone like AA, who sort of brings his intellectual might to bear on trying to map out this, because it's so complex. The structure has become so complex and so decentralized in a way that you can't just point to. Like, some people like to say, oh, it's Bill Gates, right? But it's not just Bill Gates. It's Bill Gates and the people who run his 4 different foundations, cross-referencing with the Tony Blair Foundation, cross-referencing with BlackRock, etc., etc. Like, this power structure is so far removed from like one person at this point that it almost doesn't, like, you can't, it just sort of runs itself.
And any of those people could be removed, and the system still carries
Exactly.
on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in a way, the chimpanzee stuff, you can't just see it on a presidential level, or the leader of a political entity. It has to be the alpha conflict is much bigger than that. But on the other hand, what I wanted to also comment, because you introduced this show, the sensible center and all that, and I think the appeal of those terms relates to what we've just been, what you guys were just talking about. That there's all this posturing, there's all this kind of air, but very little in terms of how does this actually protect and provide for me. Whereas the sensible center idea, well, we're going to do reasonable policies which are based on evidence, which will actually help you. That has an instinctual appeal to it, and I think the sensible center kind of branding very much conveys that sense. It's why somebody like Tony Blair, who isn't really a sensible centrist when you look at his policies, they're very idealistic and they're very progressive and so on. He frames it in such a way, and he still has an appeal for a lot of people, despite many of the terrible things he's done.
Oh no, I've talked about that many times, and it's getting old in these circles as well. But he is, a wizard in wording things a way where everyone feels heard, right? So he comes out of everything looking like someone everyone could vote for and everyone could get behind. But then when you sort of spend more than 5 minutes thinking about what he's actually said, it's like, oh no, I don't want this at all.
He's very good at the grooming part as well, right? And just like making people feel good, and and prioritizing that over alpha posturing most of the time, taking a position of like making him think like he's trying to be of service to other people.
Yeah, and various other tricks, of course. But yes, back to the idea of the sensible centrism. It's about realizing that either you're in a position to outright go to war, or you're not. And until you are, pretending that you are isn't going to get you anywhere. So, and then you can sort of compound that with some of the perennialists like Eveline Spengler and really dig deep into the black pills about how everything is over, and embrace the fact that you'll never be a heroic man in modernity or something like that. But I don't like to dig too deep in that stuff.
Well, you could also see it in this way as well. Us in our little sphere are not in a position to wage war on the regime, but we might start to think about which alliances or coalitions we'd like to be a part of to advance ourselves and our ideals. And it might not be the perfect coalition, it might not be the perfect project for us just yet. But I think of one of the examples from this chimpanzee troop was there was a young chimpanzee called Nikki who wouldn't have been capable of becoming alpha when he starts his activity, but he essentially allies with a usurper, and through supporting him, through supporting this other chimp to the alpha position, rises in status until he himself is ready to challenge. We've got to think in these sorts of terms that actually, okay, we're not going to be in 5 years' time that group, but we might be able to ally ourselves with a certain bunch who have a little bit more clout than us at this point, who could maybe raise us in the process.
Yeah.
But that's a tricky thing, though, right? Because you don't want to be, like you were mentioning earlier, the left very cleverly use various groups and then discard them. And Deval talks about how you want to be in a coalition where you're essential or necessary for the other partner. Otherwise, you're expendable and you can be dispensed of almost immediately afterwards. So it's a very tricky balance.
It reminds me of Brexit with... I'm bad with names today. What's his the Brexit man?
Boris Johnson?
No, from the UKIP.
Farage? Is it
Farage, yes.
Nigel Farage?
Farage managed to become essential to some of the platform of the Conservatives during Brexit, weirdly enough, right? Like if they wanted to have the Conservatives, they needed sort of to I won't say accept, but they had to sort of concede to Farage existing in a way that was very strange. And that's sort of almost the most power he's ever had, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was a national figure at that point.
Yeah.
But then as soon as Brexit was
He was
passed,
cast out, right?
yeah, they had no more need of him.
Let's see here. There is Ride Forever says there is no regime. That's excuse words. I'm not quite sure what you're saying here. All work begins with becoming a man, not alpha, just more internet words. Chimp. All right. I'm not sure what you're talking about.
This is like Morpheus talking to Neo here. There is no regime.
Can't barrage the Farage. Yes. I'm just checking if there's any comments that we
I
need
miss
to
it. I
highlight
miss
here.
2016.
A lot of people in chat was saying that too when we talked about Trump. They're like, I miss him, bros. It was a simpler time.
It's no longer let's go back to the 90s. It's let's go back to 2016.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're coming up on 1.5 hours here. If anyone have any questions or comments that they want us to address the last 10 minutes here, I'll keep an eye on the chat. I'll also go through the chat here. Meanwhile, I should have done this at the start, Nathan. I'm so sorry, but if people want to reach you or see more of your ideas, where can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter. I've got a Twitter page, just Nathan CJ Hood. Also, I've got a YouTube channel where I talk about mythology, and I've done a few things like chimpanzee politics and ant power structures. And then I've written a couple of articles for Praxarchy as well, one of them on chimpanzee politics. So you can find out what I'm doing in these places.
Very good. And especially if you enjoy Lord of the Rings, it seems that Nathan has you covered, but also a lot of other English mythos.
Yeah, that's right. We've with Rupert August, I've been doing a series on kind of English folk tales and mythological stories, and trying to kind of uncover a sense of English identity, because actually at the event that you were referencing earlier, one of the key ideas that came from that is English people just need to have a sense of being English again, and acknowledging that. And it's been eroded so much that until we kind of recover something like that, that we're not going to be able to form into a coalition or a group of any kind.
Mm.
And I'm sure that's applicable to other identities too.
Certainly,
so we're doing
but
a
as
little
someone from the
contribution.
outside, I can certainly agree to a certain extent that almost Britain seems to be, or the English specifically, seems to have been hit harder than most. So
Definitely.
yeah, there's a lot of work to be done.
It's even the case, the St. George's Cross, the English flag, is seen as a racist symbol just by hanging on your house. I don't know many countries where that's the case. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a far ways away from our country. That's for sure. I can't even read this, but it's funny. He says Brexit means Brexit. Or sorry, it's the Brexit means Brexit. Love me Brexit. The EU. Ate the EU. Simple as. I can't really do a good North accent.
That was beautiful.
Let's see here. He also writes the West has fallen. Burkle says, the more schizo I act by text online, the more normal and sensible and centered I become in real life. Well, that is certainly a way of of dealing with it. What did you say, Ludwig Path, a couple of episodes ago, that women go to therapy and men do podcasts?
Yes, we need catharsis. I need to get this stuff out. I have to troll people online. It has to have an outlet, right? So my family and my colleagues don't have to deal with this stuff. I don't have to talk about this at the dinner table anymore. I have these therapy sessions.
Vingol says, can Nathan briefly contrast ant versus chimp politics and how they relate to human organization? Might be a big ask.
It's a massive ask, but I'll try my best in a few minutes. I guess the key difference is chimpanzee politics is what Weber would call personal rule. It's invested in an individual, the alpha, whose decision making essentially directs the rest of the group. Whereas ant politics, if we can call it that, is essentially a super organism, a system which exists for its own sake. And all of the ants within it are, by virtue of evolutionary processes, are assigned different roles within the system. But they don't exist as kind of autonomous beings opting into it. They're just born in that way. So they're more like they're more like us today in some ways. We exist in a system where we're interchangeable, and our
Arms
whole
of an
purpose
octopus.
arms of the octopus, indeed. And our whole purpose is to make the system thrive and flourish, line go up, and so on. Whereas I don't think a chimpanzee society is like that at all. I think they're interested in the group, but they're also interested in their own well-being too. So that would, and as a consequence, so maybe the other difference is that in chimpanzee society, who's at the top is constantly under. It's very flexible because there's competition, and male chimps have something innate within them that wants them to compete to be top. Whereas the ant colony, there is no competition. They all just get on with their roles. They live in the system. They are the bug men, and so there is no fluidity in an ant colony in that respect.
As it should be. We don't get to dunk on ants for being bugmen because they are literal bugmen. Right.
They are literally, yes.
Okay, I think that's a good place to end today's stream. Luddic Path, before we leave, if people want to be browbeaten about sensible thinking, they should follow you on Twitter.
Yeah, they should. Seems to be I'm getting more likes. I mean, I've had an increase of like 100 Twitter followers.
You've been fighting a lot more, which Twitter likes.
Exponential increase in the amount of Twitter fights that I've been having. So if you like that stuff, then you can watch that. I have to again recommend people go and read Praxarchy. I mean, Nathan Hood has has the Chimpanzee Power Politics article, but he also has the most recent one, Longing for the Frontier. I think that's the most read article we have so far.
A very
you
good
should
one
read
about
yeah.
Rick Grimes and Walking Dead. Even though I haven't
Yes.
I haven't seen the show, but I got a lot out of it.
It was great, and a lot of other great writers as well. So check praxarchy.com.
And of course, you can follow me on Twitter if you like as well. And I would also encourage everyone to follow the link down below to our Matrix channel. I've sort of done a bit of a reorganization of it. So I'll try to be able to be more active in there if you have any questions or just want to hang out and chat with a lot of the people who appear on the show. I've also been in talks with Burr Carl about doing a meme review sometime soon, because the memes channel there has been steadily accruing jokes about ethnicities and gunpowder, let's put it that way. Without landing us in hot water. So please check that out if you'd like. Otherwise, we'll see you guys next week. If everything goes to plan, that should be the Wednesday the 10th. We'll be doing that on a Wednesday instead of a Thursday. And the planned guest is Dr. Edward Dutton, and we're going to be talking about some of the hubbub that's been going around lately about sort of elites trying to breed themselves out of the issues. The article that went around about elites trying to save humanity about through breeding and modern technology, and try to pick his brain about what he has to say about that.
Yeah, that could potentially be a really fun episode. So tune in.
Hopefully. Okay, thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next week.